And moving to the Taliban has confirmed today that former Taliban leader Mullah Omar is in fact dead. Taliban sources said his deputy, Mullah Akhtar Mansour, will replace him. The acknowledgement of Omar's death was made in a statement released by the Taliban spokesman and comes a day after the Afghan government announced the legendary leader had died in April of 2013. Pakistan has also since announced that peace talks between the insurgents and the Afghan government have been postponed. This week has been full of news and unrest in Jewish settlements in the West Bank. After Israel's Supreme Court upheld the destruction of 2 buildings in the Beit settlement, clashes ensued, while the Israeli Prime Minister approved hundreds of new units in the same place. Diplomatic correspondent for the News Today, Eli Ochenberg, looks back at the history and the results of Israel's evacuating settlements.
Those images from the controversial Israeli withdrawal from the Gaza Strip back in 2005, when around 8,600 settlers were evacuated from their homes, violently clashing with Israeli soldiers and using all means to fight and protest their evacuation, are engraved in the Israeli consciousness, and even now, 10 years later, still serve as an open wound. A wound that Israeli society seems to be not even close to healing. This week, similar scenes also entered the Israeli consciousness, both in the West Bank settlement of Beit El, where 2 buildings were ordered demolished, and in the ruins of the Sanur settlement near Jenin, where settlers who were evacuated from there 10 years ago as part of the withdrawal plan returned and refused to leave.
We are building once, we are building twice, until we succeed to settle in.
Don't be mad, because we'll be back. Even when you leave the army, we will be back here. And the replacement will have to deal with us.
Those harsh sights and words of young settlers once again violently confronting the Israeli security forces are similar not only to the Gaza withdrawal but also to the evacuation from the Yamit bloc in the northern part of the Sinai Peninsula in 1982 as part of the peace agreement with Egypt, and to events in 2006 when the 9 buildings in the settlement of Amona in the southern West Bank were destroyed. That reminds Israelis more than ever before what the consequences of such evictions are and how quickly such a situation can escalate.
The public now realizes that the disengagement was a mistake, even a crime, and the support now is much stronger.
In light of this traumatic reenactment and the attempts to rejuvenate the stalled peace process with the Palestinians, it's inevitable to wonder what will happen if and when not thousands but hundreds of thousands of people will have to be evacuated from the West Bank. Back in 2004, as discussions over the Gaza withdrawal began, fears in the Israeli security establishment that extreme right-wing members would try to reenact the failed attempt of the Jewish underground from 1984 to bomb the holy Muslim side of the Temple Mount were rising. But extreme actions are expected not only against the Palestinians, but also against the Israeli security forces. The heated violence on the ground, for which this week's events provided a teaser, is also likely to be an inherent part of any West Bank eviction, with fears that the situation will deteriorate to opponents using live ammunition against the IDF. On the social level, a fierce fraternal war is also very likely to happen and would give birth not only to a violent discourse, but potentially even real violence between opposing factions of the Israeli society. There's no doubt that to achieve peace, many compromises must be made. The question is, even if Jerusalem does reach groundbreaking understandings with Ramallah, what will be left of the Israeli society by the time such a large-scale operation and trauma, the evacuation of settlements, will be over?
And with me on set is Eli Ochenberg. Good evening, Eli.
Good evening, Eli.
There seems to be this disconnect in Israel. There is the plans, whether it's dismantling settlements, evacuating them, building new settlements, even a two-state solution, and then the reality on the ground, the demographic reality more than anything. What would an evacuation, theoretically, of West Bank settlements look like today?
Well, we are indeed 10 years after the disengagement from Gaza, and besides, the diplomatic reasons, the desire for greater Israel, et cetera, the reason for that being such an open wound is how the Israeli government treated, or more accurately, treated those settlers. There was supposed to be a committee that will take care of those thousands of settlers that have been evacuated from their houses, to take care of the short-term, long-term housing, financial aid, and helping them adapt to their new lives. But it didn't happen. And a special inquiry committee that was established after the disengagement even deterred that was one of the most severe violations of human rights in Israel, the way the government handled those settlers after the evacuation. And as you said, if we're talking about a scenario in which the West Bank, and it's
a whole other picture.
Exactly.
Because the number that were evacuated in Gaza, a different reality than what's going on in the West Bank.
Not several thousand, but several hundreds of thousands of people. And here again, if the country will decide to go forward with such a controversial move that will for sure raise many society, diplomatic, political issues, it simply must not do again what it did in the disengagement. And we are talking about a budget of approximately $60 billion. I'm talking only about the alternative housing and the compensation to the families, not considering the military expenses, the logistic expenses. So we were talking about really a large-scale operation that the government will have to check really thoroughly.
Very thoroughly, exactly. Think out thoroughly, which doesn't seem, when you have situations like Bet El, what we just mentioned, and in the report where you have buildings destroyed and new buildings approved at the same time, doesn't seem a long-term plan is really in the works.
Exactly that. And it's not only that there's no long-term plan, there's not even a short-term plan. And again, we're talking about large-scale, not the Gaza Strip. It was such a critical event for the Israeli society. So it's really a whole different story. And another crucial change since the disengagement is the influence of this faction, of the settlers, of the right-wing people who lives in the settlements of the West Bank, and their political power at the moment is much stronger. So it will be, again, a whole different story and a whole different struggle.
Speaking of a whole different story, in brief, is it possible to say, from looking back to 2005, the Gaza disengagement, 10 years have passed, has Israeli society changed with that time in a way that will affect that kind of a move?
Well, we've seen in the Israeli society that both extreme factions are getting more extreme, both the left wing and the right wing.
And the middle is disappearing.
Absolutely. And more importantly, again, the influence of the settlers. Naftali Bennett, the head of the Jewish Home, currently the education minister, has an increasingly rising political power. And if we're looking at our current government, a very right-wing government, there's no way such a move will go forward. But history tells us that right-wing leaders are the ones to commit such actions.
They have done them before. Ellie, I'll say goodbye for now. You'll be back with us for more on Israeli politics, not just this, all the other big issues. For now, thanks very much for this.